In Ed 27, more than 100,000 desperate Red Eyebrow rebels surrendered to Liu Shu's Luoyang regime and handed over the heirloom seal of the realm, which had been passed down since Qin Shi Huang. Liu Shu had declared himself emperor and established his court 2 years earlier. Now he possessed the imperial title, the strategic city of Luoyang, and the heirloom seal. It seemed that the Han Dynasty had been restored, but the reality was far from it. In the vast region east of Luoyang, Liu Yong, a member of the Han imperial clan, had also declared himself emperor. To the north, in Yuyang, Peng Chong, who had once sent cavalry to help Liu Shu seize Hebei, felt inadequately rewarded for his service. He refused to travel to Luoyang and prepared to break away from Liu Shu. The Guanzhong region was leaderless, with warlords large and small occupying cities and fortified camps. In this fragmentation, none submitted to another's orders. The northwestern highlands were controlled by Wei Xiao. He outwardly acknowledged Liu Shu, but in reality maintained independent command of his troops, officials, and local tax revenue. Farther west, the Hexi Corridor was held by Dou Rong. He commanded a full frontier army and 5 commanderies, and was still watching the outcome of the wars on the Central Plains. On the northern frontier, Lu Fang, backed by the Xiongnu, claimed descent from Emperor Wu of Han. Deep in the Bashu heartland at Chengdu, Gongsun Shu had already founded his own state, and like Liu Shu, styled himself emperor. In Ed 27, China was not a freshly restored empire, but a political wasteland, cobbled together from multiple emperors, local regimes, and armed factions. Liu Shu was merely one emperor among them, controlling Luoyang, the lands north of the Yellow River, and parts of the Central Plains. By this point, 5 years had passed since Liu Shu joined the Chongling rebellion. It would then take another 9 full years for his control to extend over nearly all the former territory of the Han Empire, and for the dynasty to be truly reunified. How did he accomplish this? Today, let us comprehensively analyze the Eastern Han's unification wars. After the fall of Wang Mang's regime, there was widespread hope for an end to prolonged chaos and a restoration of Han institutions and order. But restoring the Han did not necessarily mean supporting Liu Shu. In the preceding years, the Gengshe Emperor Liu Xuan had acted in the name of the Han, while the Red Eyebrows installed Liu Penza. In the east, Liu Yong, and in the north, Lu Fang, both established regimes claiming legitimacy as Han imperial clansmen or descendants. People across different regions all spoke of the Han, but the emperor they recognized was not the same. Liu Shu's most dangerous rival was Liu Yong, who controlled the Liang region. Liu Yong's background is intriguing. He was a descendant of Liu Wu, Prince Xiao of Liang, the younger brother of Emperor Jing of Han. Liu Wu had performed great service in suppressing the rebellion of the Seven Kingdoms, and was at one time a contender for the succession against Emperor Jing's son Liu Che, the future Emperor Wu, but ultimately lost. Liu Shu, for his part, was exactly a descendant of another son of Emperor Jing. Thus, the contest between Liu Shu and Liu Yong for Han legitimacy carried from the very beginning a sense of predestined conflict stretching back over a century. After the fall of the Qin dynasty, Liu Yong was enfeoffed by the Gengshe regime as the new prince of Liang. Relying on his genuine Liu lineage, he could attract officials of the old dynasty and grant royal titles to military leaders along the lower Yellow River, the Huai River Basin, and the eastern coast. These local leaders each possessed their own troops, walled cities, and grain supplies. They had no desire to surrender everything they had won immediately upon joining a new court. Liu Yong met their demands. He recognized their regional rule, allowed them to retain control of their followers, and used royal titles to bind them into a loose coalition. When the Gengshi regime collapsed, Liu Yong, with the backing of these military leaders, proclaimed himself Son of Heaven and transformed the loose alliance into a new Han regime. Consequently, the war between Liu Shu and Liu Yong was not a case of a universally acknowledged emperor chastising an impostor. Liu Yong also hailed from the Han imperial clan and had his own court, army and supporters. Both sides claimed to be restoring the Han. What they were truly fighting over was who would command the armies in eastern China, where local tax grain would be sent, and whether those who had gained power amid the chaos must submit to a unified central court. Even as Liu Yong declared himself emperor and war broke out between them, Liu Shu's own camp began to fracture. Peng Chong, the governor of Luoyang, had supported Liu Shu and supported large amounts of grain and cavalry that helped him unify Hebei. He felt that his rewards fell far short of his achievements, even far short of what his former subordinate Wu Han had received, and grew deeply resentful. He then clashed with court officials responsible for the northern provinces, and both sides bombarded Luoyang with mutual accusations. Liu Shu subsequently ordered Peng Chong to come to the capital. Peng Chong refused. He believed that once he left Luoyang, he would lose the army, grain and cities he controlled, and he could not be certain of retaining his status inside Luoyang. So he remained in the north, disobeyed the emperor's command, then proclaimed himself Prince of Yan and tried to ally with neighboring regional powers and the Xiongnu. If Liu Shu allowed Peng Chong to retain independent control of Luoyang, other generals might well make similar demands. The court would be unified in name, but in reality remain merely an alliance of military factions. Yet, if Liu Shu immediately shifted his main forces north for a prolonged siege of Luoyang, he might lose the upper hand in the war against Liu Yong and forfeit the far more critical central plains and eastern regions. Liu Shu did not personally march north. Heeding the advice of his ministers, he kept his main forces in the central plains, the core region of population and grain. As long as the central plains remained under Luoyang's control, Peng Chong, even if he held the northern frontier, would find it difficult to expand his power. Conversely, if Liu Shu lost the central plains in a bid to retaliate against Peng Chong, he would be unable to sustain a national court even if he retook Luoyang. This decision reflected both Liu Shu's superb strategic acumen and the necessities imposed by circumstances. On the geopolitical map of that era, Luoyang was not a secure rear area like Guanzhong. Luoyang was a hub extending in all directions, but that also made it vulnerable to attack from every quarter. As emperor, Liu Shu could not easily absent himself from the center. The Battle of Kunyang and the series of campaigns to pacify Hebei had already proven Liu Shu an outstanding commander, perhaps even the finest in his camp. This trump card could not be played lightly except as a last resort. Thus, around AD 27, Liu Shu dispatched generals north to maintain a defensive line, using defense as offense while waiting for an opportunity. To the east, he repeatedly sent heavy troop concentrations to relentlessly strike at Liu Yong's regime. He could not afford to give a rival who could contest his legitimacy much breathing room. At the same time, Liu Shu scraped together troops to enter the Guanzhong region after the Red Eyebrows had departed. By then, Guanzhong lay in ruins. Cities had lost stable grain supplies, rural populations had scattered, and the roads to Luoyang and the northwest were severed by different armies. To survive, many common people gathered in walled stockades, entrusting their grain and weapons to local leaders who could protect them. After the Red Eyebrows left, these stockades and armed bands did not disband on their own. Multiple warlords still operated around Chang'an, each commanding anywhere from a few thousand to over 10,000 men. They occupied cities, passes and roads, levied grain from the surrounding countryside, sometimes jointly attacking Han forces, sometimes fighting among themselves. In name, this region already belonged to Liu Xiu. In practice, Luoyang's orders only reached the places where Han troops were stationed. Liu Xiu entrusted the task of restoring the Chang'an area to Feng Yi. Compared with Deng Yu, who had earlier entered Guanzhong, Feng Yi was more steady, mature and taciturn. His comrades jokingly called him the Big Tree General. Yet it was he who, at a perilous moment when Deng Yu was repeatedly defeated by the Red Eyebrows, steadied the line and won a crucial ambush, forcing the hundreds of thousands of Red Eyebrows into the trap Liu Xiu had laid, ultimately leading to their surrender. Therefore, after the Red Eyebrows capitulated, Liu Xiu sent him to lead the Luoyang Han forces into Guanzhong. His goal was to end the chaos there and turn it into a stable rear area for the Luoyang regime. Feng Yi accordingly fought and offered amnesty at the same time. Warlords who refused to yield roads and cities and continued attacking commanderies and counties were defeated by Han forces. Those willing to submit received pardons, official posts and noble titles, and could keep part of their property. But surrender came with one clear condition. They had to give up their private armies. These men could no longer exist as intact personal forces. Some of the able-bodied and battle-hardened were broken up and absorbed into the Han army under imperial commanders. The majority were registered on the civil rolls, sent back to their home villages, or granted new land. The populations in the stockades were gradually moved out and brought back under the administration of commanderies and counties. This process could not be accomplished by edict alone. The farmland around Chang'an had gone to waste, and many who surrendered, even if they were willing to lay down arms, lacked sufficient seeds, tools, and grain to last until the next harvest. Liu Xiu shipped grain and cloth westward from the more stable regions along the Middle and Lower Yellow River to supply the army, relieve the populace, and settle the recently surrendered followers. Luoyang also dispatched local officials anew, restoring county seats, roads and granaries, so that those who surrendered would not need to cling to their former military chiefs. This was precisely what the Gengshe regime and the Red Eyebrows had never managed to do. It was a complete, executable package of reconstruction. After handing over their troops, local leaders could receive offices and wealth. After laying down their weapons, ordinary soldiers could obtain grain, household registration, and the chance to farm again. The court, in turn, regained population, land, and tax revenue. By around AD 28, the main roads around Chang'an and its environs were gradually restored, and many stockade leaders brought their followers in surrender. People drawn into the armies by war began returning to the fields, and cities formerly held by armed groups were handed back to court officials. Liu Xiu's Luoyang regime proved once again that it could not only contend for the realm, but also govern it. Meanwhile, the war in eastern China continued. Liu Yong was killed by one of his own subordinates during a battle with Han forces. But his death did not cause the whole regime to surrender. The eastern generals immediately installed his successor, continuing to hold cities and command troops. This example casts into sharp relief the Luoyang regime's success in Guanzhong. The life or death of a single opponent does not determine the end of a war. An emperor can be killed, but the local leaders, armies and interest groups that sustain him still remain. The war would truly end only when these people could be convinced that they could survive after giving up their armies, and that joining Luoyang was safer than continuing to carve out their own domains. In the spring of AD 29, Peng Chong, the self-proclaimed Prince of Yan, was killed in his own residence. The killers were not troops sent from Luoyang, but slaves in his personal service. After Peng Chong's death, his son tried to continue commanding the local forces, only to be quickly killed by his own subordinates. The Yan regime, which had once possessed crack cavalry, strong fortresses, and Xiongnu support, collapsed from within without a decisive battle. Northern officials and generals subsequently surrendered to Liu Xiu, and Yu Yang returned to the Luoyang court. Liu Xiu had previously refrained from committing his main forces north for a protracted period. He merely blocked Peng Chong's avenues of expansion into the Central Plains, while continuing to contest with Liu Yong for the population, grain and communication lines there. Peng Chong's rule had been sustained largely by past meritorious service, local cavalry and personal ties. But he could not convince his followers that this independent regime could endure, nor could he offer a system of offices, titles and benefits more stable than Luoyang's. Once those around him began reassessing the situation, the military bloc he relied on rapidly disintegrated. No sooner had the northern problem been resolved than a mutiny broke out among Liu Xiu's own forces. In AD 29, a general long trusted by Liu Xiu and assigned to campaign in the east suddenly murdered a court official and defected with his troops to the separatist regime led by Liu Yong's son. This general knew the Han army's dispositions and which cities were weakly garrisoned. Joining forces with eastern warlords, he swiftly attacked an important city controlling the north-south roads, attempting to sever Luoyang's links in the east. This betrayal was far more dangerous than Peng Chong's rebellion. Peng Chong had been far away on the northern frontier and could not directly threaten Luoyang. This general, however, came from within the Han army itself. If he could defeat the local defenders, other regional leaders who had yet to choose sides might conclude that Liu Xiu could not even control his own generals, and the loosening Eastern coalition might coalesce once more. This was exactly the kind of moment, as we mentioned earlier, when the trump card of Liu Xiu's camp, Liu Xiu himself, had to be played. Liu Xiu immediately left Luoyang and personally led his troops eastward. Rather than waiting for his various forces to assemble slowly, he first dispatched cavalry in a rapid march to relieve the city and prevent the rebels from fully linking up with local armed groups. When the Han army arrived, the garrisons sallied out from within, while the relief force attacked from without, forcing the rebels to retreat. Liu Xiu then pressed the pursuit, breaking apart this newly formed alliance and depriving the mutinous general of stable cities and grain sources. Under sustained and intense pressure, local leaders who had previously opposed Liu Xiu began to recalculate. These men had received overtures from both Liu Xiu and Liu Yong. Liu Xiu was willing to pardon their past deeds and grant noble titles, but demanded that they relinquish the power to independently appoint officials and mobilize troops. Liu Yong, by contrast, was willing to directly confer royal titles and recognize the lands and armies they already held. For leaders who still controlled large swathes of territory, Liu Yong's initial offer was clearly more attractive. One of the most powerful among them chose to join Liu Yong, killed the Luoyang envoy sent to offer amnesty, and continue to rule as a king. Yet after a few years, what each side could actually deliver had diverged completely. Liu Yong was dead. His successor could only maintain a nominal court, propped up by a few mutually independent armies. This regime could still grant royal titles, but it could not guarantee that a recipient's territory would not be seized by Han forces. nor could it continuously supply grain and reinforcements. Luoyang offered lower titles and stricter terms, but by now Liu Xiu controlled the Middle Yellow River, Guanzhong, and the main northern regions, enabling him to constantly move troops and supplies eastward. Luoyang's Han armies cut the roads between the various armed groups, seized granaries and communication hubs, and forced local leaders into dispersed defensive positions. Liu Yong's son could not concentrate his forces to relieve them, and the royal titles ceased to provide any real protection. The local leader who had earlier killed the Luoyang envoy ultimately came out of his city and surrendered. He lost his royal title and independent rule, but kept his life and received a Han noble rank. His followers were broken up, some absorbed into the Han army, the rest handed over to local officials for registration. This choice immediately influenced the remaining cities still holding out. Once the strongest local army in the east had accepted Luoyang's terms, continuing to fight for Liu Yong's successor made it increasingly difficult to secure grain, reinforcements, or a clear outcome. From AD 28 to 30, the main separatist blocks north of the Yangtze River, along the lower Yellow River, and on the eastern coast were successively besieged, defeated, or induced to surrender. Some leaders were killed when their cities fell. Some followers capitulated when relief forces were cut off. Others, seeing their old alliances disintegrate, voluntarily accepted noble titles from Luoyang. The imperial title left behind by Liu Yong gradually lost its military and territorial foundations, and the rival Han project in the east came to an end. After stabilizing the central plains around AD 30, Liu Xiu could finally turn to the thorniest problems: the separatist forces in the northwest and southwest. Amid the chaos on the central plains, a general appointed by Wang Mang, Dou Rong, had seized the moment to take control of the 5 commanderies of the entire Hexi Corridor. He commanded crack frontier troops, local officials, and a relatively intact tax system. While the central plains were ravaged by continuous warfare, this region had not suffered the same degree of destruction. Agriculture, cities, and administration still functioned. The other northwestern separatist, Wei Xiao, thus tried to draw Dou Rong to his side. Wei Xiao controlled the highlands west of the Long Mountains and the routes to the upper Yangtze River, while Gongsun Shu in the south occupied the wealthy Sichuan basin. If the Hexi Corridor, the northwestern highlands, and the southwestern basin could support one another, the 3 western blocks might rely on mountains, deserts, and long supply lines to halt Luoyang's armies. For Dou Rong, this was not an entirely unworkable plan. He had troops, territory, and the means to continue biding his time. But Dou Rong and his Hexi officials judged that the balance of forces had shifted. Liu Xiu controlled the majority of the population and grain-producing areas, and could continuously dispatch troops westward from multiple directions. The 3 western blocks occupied formidable terrain, but they had neither a unified command nor a common political center. Wei Xiao wanted to preserve his own highland stronghold. Gongsun Shu had already proclaimed himself emperor. If Dou Rong joined them, he would merely be entering a protracted war with an uncertain outcome. Dou Rong therefore chose to submit to Luoyang while he still had his army, territory, and bargaining power. He voluntarily recognized Liu Xiu's imperial status and accepted court offices. Liu Xiu, for his part, did not immediately dismantle the Hexi bloc. He recognized the existing positions of local officials and generals, gave Dou Rong high office and honors, and continued to let the Hexi forces handle local defense. Wei Xiao, the ruler of the Longyu region, took the opposite course. He had nominally submitted to Liu Xiu quite early, and even sent his own son to Luoyang. Yet court officials could not enter his territory. The army, tax revenues, and local appointments in the northwestern highlands remained firmly under his control. After the Eastern Wars ended, Liu Xiu began demanding that Wei Xiao fulfill the duties of a vassal. Luoyang was preparing to attack Gongsun Shu in the southwestern basin and needed to use the roads Wei Xiao controlled. He was also required to contribute troops. Wei Xiao repeatedly stalled, unwilling to let Han forces pass through his territory, and even less willing to place the northwestern army under Luoyang's command. This demand made the previously ambiguous relationship impossible to sustain. A regional ruler who truly submitted to the court could retain office and wealth, but had to accept the central government's right to dispatch his troops. What Wei Xiao wanted was to use the name of Han while continuing to possess independent foreign relations, an independent army, and an independent domain. In AD 31, Wei Xiao formally accepted a royal title from Gongsun Shu. The northwestern highlands and southwestern basin thus formed an alliance, and Wei Xiao transformed from a nominal Han vassal into an overt separatist, blocking Liu Xiu's westward advance. At the same time, people within Wei Xiao's camp had already begun to defect. A key general who had served him for years and was thoroughly familiar with the northwestern roads and troop deployments switched allegiance to Luoyang and subsequently helped Liu Xiu plan the routes into the highlands. Wei Xiao still possessed the mountains and his army, but he was beginning to lose the men who best understood those conditions. In AD 32, Han troops first infiltrated the mountains via small paths and seized a strategic point deep inside Wei Xiao's territory. Wei Xiao concentrated tens of thousands of troops and besieged it for months, and even received reinforcements from the southwestern regime, but could not retake it. Liu Xiu then personally led a western expedition, while the Hexi forces applied pressure from another direction. Han troops penetrated deep into the northwestern highlands, but the mountain roads were long and grain supplies difficult to sustain. Some units were eventually forced to withdraw. Wei Xiao, relying on the terrain and reinforcements from the southwest, once again narrowly escaped destruction. Yet before long, this well-regarded local leader, who had grappled with Liu Xiu for so long, simply fell ill and died. After his death, his son continued to resist from the remaining cities. The war dragged on, and even Feng Yi, the famous general who had recovered Guanzhong, died of illness during the campaign against Long Yu. By AD 34, Han armies re-entered the northwestern highlands. The defenders, their grain exhausted and with no hope of reinforcements, surrendered one after another, and the last stronghold was stormed. Only then was Long Yu formally pacified. In AD 25, the very year Liu Xiu proclaimed himself emperor north of the Yellow River, Gongsun Shu also founded his Chengdu regime in Chengdu. Unlike local warlords who depended on roving armies, Gongsun Shu controlled the entire Sichuan basin. Surrounded by mountains on all sides, with the Yangtze Three Gorges to the east and only narrow mountain roads to the north, it was extremely difficult for outside forces to enter. Inside the basin, however, there was stable agriculture, population, and a system of commanderies and counties, capable of sustaining an army and a court for a long time. While the Central Plains wars raged, Gongsun Shu continuously received officials and generals fleeing into the southwest and expanded into neighboring areas. Although Liu Xiu repeatedly urged him to surrender, he never launched an immediate assault. As long as enemies remained in the east and northwest, Han forces could not cross the long mountain roads and the Yangtze waterways to commit their main strength into Sichuan. Gongsun Shu thus gained over a decade to develop his state. By around AD 30, the strategic situation began to change. Liu Xiu now controlled central eastern China and Guanzhong, allowing him to concentrate the resources of the empire's main grain-producing regions. Dou Rong in Hexi had voluntarily submitted, while Wei Xiao in the northwest had allied with Gongsun Shu in an attempt to jointly block Luoyang's westward push. Gongsun Shu's security became increasingly dependent on the northwestern highlands, serving as the external shield of the Sichuan basin. In AD 34, the last stronghold of the Wei Xiao bloc was stormed by Han forces. With the northern shield of Sichuan gone, Liu Xiu launched a two-pronged invasion. One army crossed the northwestern mountains into the northern part of the basin. The other sailed up the Yangtze River and breached the Three Gorges defense line. Gongsun Shu was forced to defend two routes to Chengdu simultaneously. In the early phase of the war, the Chengdu regime still had the ability to counterattack. Two main Han generals were assassinated one after another, momentarily stalling the expedition. In AD 36, after closing in on Chengdu, the Han forces grew overconfident, divided their troops, and were defeated by Gongsun Shu, who had concentrated his strength. Their grain supplies also ran low. Yet the territory Gongsun Shu could control had shrunk to the capital's vicinity. Outer cities and roads had fallen to Han forces one after another, and he could no longer draw grain or reinforcements from other regions. In the winter of that year, Gongsun Shu personally led his army out of the city for a decisive battle. He was gravely wounded in the fighting and died that night. The next day, Chengdu opened its gates and surrendered. After nearly 30 years, the Han Empire was formally reunified. There is a fascinating parallel here. Liu Bang, Emperor Gaozu of Han, took 7 years to found the Han Dynasty, and then spent another 7 years continuously suppressing rebellions, only truly completing the Great Unification in 195 BC, just before his death. The entire process took 14 years. Counting from the raising of troops at Chongling in AD 22 to the surrender of Chengdu in AD 36, the time Liu Xiu took to complete the empire's reunification was exactly 14 years as well.